Welcome to Corpse Club, the official podcast of DailyDead.com. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jonathan James. I'm joined today by Derek Anderson, Bryan Christopher, and Scott Drebit. Today's episode will mostly focus on underwater, so I'm going to give a big old spoiler warning because we're going to talk everything about it. So if you haven't seen it, go see it. I loved it. I think my co-host loved it, but we'll find out more soon. But before we get to that, I wanted to catch up with my fellow Corpse Club members and co-hosts because it's been a little bit since we've chatted, and I stalk you guys sometimes on Twitter. Sometimes I'm going through my Twitter account and I'm like, oh, look, what are they watching? And I want to know what you're doing, but I have no active Twitter presence, so it's not like I'm just gonna like DM you or send a reply from the main Daily Dead account. So I'm just like, oh, I wonder what they're doing. So so anyway, besides cyber stalking, I figure we can just talk about it here. Bryan, we were chatting in our retros. Derek, you probably remember the year because I don't remember the year it came out, but I should know. When we did our retros for the 2010s, we talked about how Insidious was one of our favorite movies, at least one of my favorite movies of the 2010s, and Bryan hadn't seen it. Bryan, I know you have seen it. What do you think?
Yeah, it was kind of one of those ones that I didn't see at the time. And then for whatever reason, I just got obstinate about it because everybody kept saying that I should see it. And usually when people do that, I just get cranky and then I won't see it. Finally came around and saw it. And I have to begrudgingly say, yes, I thoroughly enjoyed Insidious. And I get what everybody is talking about. I don't know what I have to add to the conversation at this point. I mean, it's pretty well been covered in almost 10 years, other than to say that, I think everybody kind of led into it saying like, oh, you're going to love the lipstick face demon. And yes, that was creepy. I thought that Patrick Wilson's Parasite was much creepier. And I suppose now I'm going to have to watch Insidious 2 just to see how that all pans out.
And is Patrick Wilson's parasitic demon, is that the one that people kind of refer to as like the Darth Maul demon?
No, that's his son. That's the lipstick demon.
Oh, okay.
His parasite is kind of like the old, the kind of tattered old woman that kind of keeps popping out of the shadows.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I need to rewatch this because it's been a long time since I've seen it, and I've been rewatching all the Conjuring movies with my sister and brother-in-law because they're kind of watching them for the first time. So I'm rewatching those for the first time in a while, and I always feel like Insidious is Conjuring adjacent. I know it's not technically in the universe, but it kind of felt like that's what James Wan was. It kind of was like very Conjuring-esque, and I know he did this kind of right before doing The Conjuring and kickstarting that universe. So I feel like it's time for a revisit for me because I'm curious how it'll hold up, and it sounds like it holds up pretty well.
Yeah, I think the thing that worked best in terms of like other than the creature designs was just the whole idea of what was the kind of the astral projection realm called again? Didn't they have like a specific name for that?
Yeah,
yes, the further. That was creepy as hell. Just the idea of like you're in your space, but it's not your space anymore. It's just like it's not quite right. It actually reminded me of similar vibes to Silent Hill when they're kind of in that same alternate like limbo dimension. And that's kind of that's something that'll mess with me, that idea of like the familiar being turned into something malevolent and dark. So that was probably the thing that got under my skin the most in the movie.
Yeah, and it was done for such a low budget that, showing what the further looks like. I mean, if you break it down, it's darkened corridors with fog in it, but he takes that and builds his imagination upon it, so it looks like you're getting something bigger than what they actually had to work with. I think the scares are really well executed. And I think it has what I really like about it the most. I think the single thing is that it thrust Lynn Shay into the spotlight that she's enjoyed in the horror genre since this came out. I think it's just a really great turn, and it's a really great character. And I'm always in for anything Patrick Wilson does. Plus, you get gratuitous Barbara Hershey, which is always a good thing.
Yeah. No, there's so many great things about this movie. I mean, I would go as far to say it is better than almost every Conjuring movie or every Conjuring movie. I don't think that's a heresy. It's a great movie, and I mean, and I love that concept of basically like the misdirection, because we are following that lipstick face demon for most of the movie, but the idea that there's this other creature that's just waiting, like you can it followed you when you were little, you thought you lost it, you went to school and you got a job and you got married and had a kid, and then it's still waiting for you. So I thought that was really cool. They never quite recapture that magic in the other sequels. I think the Insidious Chapter 2 is my least favorite because it continues the storyline following that family, as opposed to, I like 3 and 4 better, where they just follow Lin Shaye's character. But I'd still say they're all worth a watch. So curious to see what you think.
And I think what was interesting about Patrick Wilson's arc is that they kind of do a misdirect where you don't really think it's his movie to begin with. They're focusing more on Rose Byrne's character at first, and then, a little bit more towards like the son as being the one who's haunted. And it's kind of only as you start piecing together what's been going on this whole time that it really is like it turns into Patrick Wilson's story. And he kind of goes from being a almost unlikable character. Like he's a bit aloof. You can tell he's kind of, more interested in going to school than he is with really dealing with the family stuff. As stuff starts hitting the fan, you learn later that there's a reason why he wants to stay at the school that maybe he doesn't even quite understand. But watching that kind of that whole arc is really interesting and really made it for kind of something a little bit extra special.
And it was the first of so many horror movie roles for Patrick Wilson in the 2010s. Like when we look back on that decade, he's got to be one of the most prolific and talented actors that we saw in the horror genre that whole decade. Because, I mean, this is before even the Conjuring movies where he was spearheading those stories. So he did 2 Insidious movies, 2 full-on Conjuring movies, not to mention the spin-offs that we saw and his appearances in those, and then Bone Tomahawk and all these other movies. Like he really became kind of one of the faces of the horror genre, like very quietly in a way, just because it seems like he's not super flashy, but he does the job. He does it well. And here we are now with all these horror movies with Patrick Wilson front and center. It's kind of interesting how he's become, I'm not going to say he's like the Vincent Price, the next Vincent Price, but I feel like when people look back, 60, 70 years from now, they're going to be like, well, Patrick Wilson was almost like that for that generation. It's kind of interesting how it turned out that way.
And might I add, in something that's not horror, but maybe horror adjacent, because it is a James Wan movie. I don't know if any of you have seen Aquaman, but him as the ocean master is just delightfully smarmy. He gets to add a little bit of personality. It's douchey, but it's still personality that he doesn't get as much chance to do in some of his other movies. So, and plus, apparently now they're, I don't know if that's still on, that they're going to make an actual horror movie out of the trench monsters. That's also going to be by James Wan. They keep
talking about it. We might see it. It's one of those, I'll believe it when it hits actual production. But if they do it, that'd be awesome.
I know we'll probably talk about this later, but I almost feel like Underwater maybe tapped into that a little bit.
Derek, jumping ahead.
But it's too early of a segue.
It's a good jumping off point. But I'm glad, Brian, that you got a chance to see it and that you liked it. And Scott, thanks for laughing through it, Derek. But no, we're not getting to Underwater yet, because why would I? Derek, I need to follow up on your Resident Evil 7 progress. So we had talked, I don't even know if it was on a bonus episode. I think at this point we did, when we were talking about our bonus episode, the last one that came out, we talked how you were into Resident Evil 7. You were 50, 70% through. How's the whole experience been? And did you finish it?
Yes, my dad and I finished the main campaign. We clocked in around 28 hours of game time on that campaign. And oh my gosh, it was such a hellish but awesome experience. It was one of the more terrifying stories I've seen or played in the past, well, I guess ever. And it was great. It felt like the first half, I know it was definitely more Texas Chainsaw Massacre meets Silent Hill meets just Resident Evil horrified goodness. But it was really cool. I would say I would definitely recommend it. But yeah, I'm kind of traumatized at the same time. So it was one of the scariest things I've done in a long time.
It's definitely one of the best gaming experiences I've had. And it's funny because the best horror gaming experiences I've had have been on PS4. Both that, and then I know you own Until Dawn. You just need to boot up Until Dawn.
Yeah, I feel like that'll be the next game we do. I mean, it almost like we had to decompress a little bit after this one. And there's a few DLCs to play as well, which I think would be interesting because I want to know more about the backstory of that family that at the house and everything, Zoe's family. But yeah, it was it was such, I swear, like I almost had tears in my eyes at the end because just after going through all that stuff, it was just so horrific and it felt like you were actually living that nightmare. So I'm excited to do that again, but I want to go back and gather some more antique coins and things like that because we left 4 on the table that we still didn't find. But yeah, I am definitely glad I played it and appreciate the recommendation.
Yeah, I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, I really want to get into the VR version of it, but honestly, I mean, it was so like it was so intense, and yeah. I'm glad that. I mean, I think I finished in around 15 hours. Maybe it was shorter, but yeah, I'm definitely glad it was like that. The game was that length. Like I think it would be exhausting at like 40 hours. I think it was like the perfect amount of time.
And I feel like the first half was a lot harder than the second half because there's a lot more stealth involved. You're hiding a lot more. You have less bullets, and it's just even scarier, I think. Like we got stuck on the chainsaw fight with Daddy for a long time. I mean, we spent over a day on that just trying to get through that, which kind of felt like it was straight out of Evil Dead 2. And then I feel like towards the second half of the game, it becomes almost more like a Saw movie in some regards, but then it goes full on like Resident Evil action horror by the end. But so it's kind of a good melting pot. It has a little bit of everything, but I think it's by far more like, it feels more like Silent Hill than Resident Evil, which I think really works well.
Yeah.
Am I the only one who's a little upset that Derek and his dad don't have their own Twitch channel?
I would watch that.
There we go.
I want to watch them.
I want to watch them play Until Dawn. I like watching people play it.
I would throw in a few bitcoins to see that for sure.
Ooh. Might have to fire that thing up.
Monetize that bitch, Derek. Let's go.
Got a little side hustle going. Yeah, let me run it by
what's your dad's first name?
Dwayne.
Derek and Dwayne. D&D.
Yeah.
D&D. D&D playing D&D.
That'd be good.
I would pay for that too.
I would.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, you never know. That actually would be a lot of fun. I'm definitely going to play Until Dawn soon. I feel like now is the time after years of saying I'm going to play it. So.
No, I would normally question it, but you played Resident Evil 7, so keep it going.
Yeah, and fulfill promises for once.
And then Scott, I already said it before, but just so that we have it officially on the episode, happy birthday and happy belated birthday. How was your birthday? I know you partied down a little bit, but I didn't get too many details.
Oh, there's not a lot of details to tell,
but I want them.
Dust. I saw a clip from his birthday party where he came up out of his coffin on the ship. It was really like he just kind of like tilted up. It was almost supernatural, but he looked really good. Like he looked really spry.
If I could tilt myself up supernaturally, I would, trust me, because I don't know, turning to the left causes me to go to ER. So
you're not an amber turner?
No. So no, it was I was sick for my birthday, and the night before I had some ales and sang some songs at a local establishment.
What songs did you sing?
I did kind of eclectic. I did the Cars, It's All I Can Do. And
nice.
And then I followed it up with a little Sweet Caroline.
Diamond Drebit.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have to. One day we all have to get together and do karaoke. We didn't when we went to Flashback. We couldn't find one in time.
No.
Well, I think there wasn't there one, but it was like not open as late or something.
It was a 45-minute drive, and I think I was up for it, but I think we had lost a lot of people by then. I think that was a bowling night. I'm like, come on, guys, let's go.
I don't think I don't think we had any drivers available.
No. But we Scott and I got the acoustic guitar player to sing Loverboy working for the weekend.
That's right.
I do remember that. I forgot
First
about it.
Scott, you had to tell him who Loverboy was and what that song was, which was a little mind blowing at the time, but
if you say so. I don't remember any of that, but I'll trust you.
Gee, guys, it sounds like you've had a really great time.
Oh my God, Brian. Listen.
Hey, Brian, I'm going to try my hardest this year for us to be at the Salem Horror Fest at the same time. I'm excited for it. They already announced it. They already announced the dates. The dates are pretty good for me this year.
They've got all kinds of stuff. They've got that Woman in Guts thing coming up in May.
I know.
And now they've got the main festival happening in October. So they're keeping busy up there in Massachusetts.
Yeah, I'm excited. But no, we will all get together again. This I promise you.
Sounds like a threat, really, but okay.
Yeah, whether you like it or not, we're meeting up. Scott, did you watch anything over your? For me, my birthday tends to like sprawl out over the course of the month. So I'm like, it's my birthday month, so we're watching this. Did you watch anything? I know you caught up on some things, but I can't remember what you put on your Twitter feed.
Neither do I. I could look it up. Well, on my birthday, we watched Midsommar.
Was it the director's cut?
It was. What's that?
What? I don't know.
No, not the director's cut.
I think the director's cut is available on Apple. But
okay.
So
if
you're not going
he
crazy,
would have just
Derek.
gotten done like 15 minutes ago.
Right.
Yeah, no, this was just the regular Blu-ray theatrical cut.
Nothing wrong with that, though.
No. And it held up great for me on rewatch, and Michelle really dug it. So
I feel like that one's more rewatchable than Hereditary.
Yeah, I came out of that with the same, like, I think Hereditary is the better movie, but I can't watch that a bunch of times because it is just a very kind of like soul-sucking experience. Midsommar is just a little bit more it's weird to say considering what happens in the movie, but like emotionally palatable than Hereditary is. So it's something, I feel like I can go back to that more, but I still think Hereditary is a movie that I think is better.
We were not watching the same movies, guys. I liked Hereditary. Well, I took a bunch of people to Hereditary at different times, and so I enjoyed seeing other people's reaction to that. I don't want to take a bunch of people to Midsommar. I went to go see it with my mom the first time, and it was awkward as hell.
It's one of those movies where you just kind of look around at the audience and just see how everyone's taking it.
That being said as well, I don't know. I feel because it's more in the supernatural realm, it's just me. But with Hereditary, like I can watch that, and for me, it's not as draining. But yeah, for Midsommar for me is.
Now you're making me feel a little self-conscious because I went to see Midsommar alone with like a Ziploc bag of Raisinets and like a can of LaCroix. And I wonder if people are like, who's this creepy guy with the Ziploc bag? Like, just
Derek, I think the thing that people were really worried about is that you weren't wearing pants. I think that's kind of what threw people off.
Well, I don't know. I like it better than Hereditary. I think it works better as a whole film, whereas I thought Hereditary had a lot of great high spots, but didn't really hold together for me. So, and I thought Florence Pugh is just fantastic in it. And if she isn't, I think the movie would kind of collapse. The whole story kind of hinges around her, of course. So, but she's terrific in it. And so, yeah, I just kind of, as an overall experience, I prefer Midsommar.
I definitely agree about Florence Pugh. This is kind of like her coming out year between Midsommar and then Little Women. She is.
Oh, and Fighting with My Family.
I've heard that's also very good too. I haven't seen that one, but
and she's completely different in that as well. Like it's
wow.
Yeah.
And next she's got a Marvel movie coming up. So yeah, she's kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
Oh, in the new Black Widow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's her sister.
Her sister, Little Widow. No,
Naturally.
I don't know. Does she have a name in the comic books?
I'm sure
she does.
bet
I
it's
don't
Russian.
know. I don't know the Black Widow comics as much, so I have to bow out of this one.
Well, there's no one to bow in, so we're kind of screwed then.
We are to be continued.
Yeah, I feel like in Midsommar too. Did you notice Easter eggs the second time around, Scott, with things in the background, or because I feel like I've heard a lot of things like that you can see in the background upon a rewatch.
Well, did you see that screen that made it on Twitter with the sister and the tube?
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
And there's a theory too that the opening scene is maybe not an accident, and that, or not. I mean, I know it's not an accident, but that there's other intentions in that opening scene.
I was gonna say, Derek, definitely wasn't.
Oh no! This might blow your minds, guys.
What kind of accident would result in this? I know what you mean, though, Derek. I have heard that.
I don't know
that it wasn't coincidental that it happened, is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. The word of the day.
Oh.
So, Scott, aside from Midsommar, have you seen anything else lately? What else you been watching?
Oh my gosh! So I watched Mortuary last night, and it's going to be the topic of my next dust off. I just loved it. I had seen it like back in '83 when it came out on video, 83, 84. And it has this amazing TV trailer that has this voiceover talking about, spooky stuff. You see the moon, and then you see Michael Berryman as a grave digger digging a grave, and then a hand comes out of the ground and pulls him into the grave. And that's the commercial for Mortuary. Michael Berryman does not appear in Mortuary, nor does anything that happens in that trailer have anything to do with the movie. So right off the bat, you're off to a great start just when you know where it's coming from.
You gotta admire that.
You have one of the Walton kids stars in it, and her dad gets killed, and she witnesses it, but everyone thinks that it was an accident, and no one will believe her, right?
Mm-hmm.
John Boy did it.
Or Jim Boy.
Oh, I wish. And then her boyfriend and another guy go to I'm trying to just keep all this straight, go to a funeral home warehouse to get a couple tires that this guy was owed from when he worked for the Mortuary, which is ran by Christopher George. So they go by this warehouse, and they're grabbing the tires, and they hear this chanting. And the one guy goes, "Hey, what's that over there?" So they go to this window, and there's Christopher George, Linda Day George, and a few other people, and they're all wearing robes and cloaks, and they're dancing in a circle and chanting. And the guy who used to work for Christopher George, as they're looking through the window, he says, "Oh yeah, they're having a séance." There's no table around, nor are they trying to contact anyone. So, and they keep calling it a séance, but it goes from there that one of the guys gets killed by a person in a black robe and a white face with the rod that they use in when they're doing the embalming rod. Gets killed, gets pierced with the embalming rod. So you're thinking the movie is possibly supernatural, and then it turns out it isn't, but instead it's basically a revenge slasher where you're told 3/4 of the way through the movie in a piece of dialogue who the killer is. But yet it keeps going. And it's amazing tonally. It's hard to describe. Scenes are put together, but they could go there. They maybe don't have to. It's just a fascinating slasher that is just a little bit different than what we were getting at the time for slashers, because like I said, it might be supernatural, and then it's not supernatural, and then it could be a slasher, but now it's a revenge movie. It has a little bit of everything for everyone, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, there's your drive-in dust-off of the week, everybody. No need to.
Oh my God! I hope it's better than that. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Bill Paxton is in it as well as the son of Christopher George.
What year did this come out?
83.
83. Okay.
It was Christopher George's last role.
Taken from us too soon.
And I think it's on Amazon Prime right now.
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Here's what happens to me on Amazon Prime. I put on this movie. I've been like, oh, I've been wanting to see this movie. And I put it on passively while I'm working. And then I'm like, no, I want to watch this movie. Then I stop it and I put on Monster Club.
And then you can get back to work.
Yeah, so I have all these movies that are just sitting there. It's like Mortuary. I don't know. I have dozens of other movies. I'm like, oh, it's so great that Amazon Prime has these. And then haven't gotten to them.
Have you guys seen the movie They're Playing with Fire? With Sybil Danning?
I don't think so.
Oh, the guy who directed this, the following year he directed They're Playing with Fire. And it's a similar kind of film, because the first part of it is basically the seduction of this high school student by this woman, and there's kind of, shady goings on to do with her husband, etc. And then the back half of the movie turns into a slasher.
Nice. So it's a little Howard.
I have to see more of his work, because if all of his movies follow this same kind of Eli Roth screenwriting technique, I'm in 100%.
I feel like Amazon is kind of like the gold mine for your potential dust-off movies, because that's like right in that. They have so many like late 70s, early 80s like B-movie content on there.
Yeah, Tubi is great too.
Oh yeah, it's kind
Tubi
of
is
like
great, and of course Shudder. Shudder is a great resource as well.
So you have Ditos for you've got another like 200 Ditos lined up. Oh yeah.
Handwritten.
Oh, perfect. I knew you worked ahead. I just didn't know how much.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That is amazing though, how you can just, all these movies are right at our fingertips from this like sweet golden era of horror that you really can't find on some of the other streaming services anymore. They found a home.
No, there's a lot of great stuff on Amazon Prime. I'm really happy with it, even though I just watched Monster Club.
And actually, I watched a much more recent movie on Amazon Prime. I rewatched Quiet Place for the first time since seeing it in theaters. My sister, brother-in-law, and dad had not seen it, and with the new one coming out in March, we decided to watch it. And it was weird because it was one of those movies I didn't really see myself watching again, based on, you kind of know like the concept and everything. And you're wondering, is this just like a one trick kind of screening, and is it going to have rewatchability value? But I will say I was maybe even more scared the second time watching it, because that sound design in that movie is so punishing, and the scares work just as well, even when when they're coming, that I would definitely rewatch that again, and it holds the hell up.
I'll probably watch it again, just getting ready for the sequel. But yeah, I haven't seen it since the first time, but I really liked it.
Yeah, and I feel like I liked the story more the second time too, because I was a little like, I felt like some things were avoidable the first time, and I still feel that way with some of the decisions, but I feel like so much happens so quickly that it's so relentless. It's like as my dad put it, like that family's having the worst night of their lives. Like everything that you can imagine going wrong goes wrong in that movie for that family. And I think it's pretty smart for the most part. So I really dug it a second time. So if you're wondering if it holds up, it does.
It's also a pretty good endorsement for birth control.
Well, in the apocalypse, especially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that damn nail. Would someone just grab a hammer and just tap that damn nail? I don't care if you make noise. I mean, that thing, there's children going up and down the stairs even after someone steps on it. Just get that nail out of there. I want to go in the movie. If I could pick one movie to go into, I'd go into A Quiet Place and I would pull that nail out. And I will die from the monster as long as that nail can get out of that floor.
This is the loudest, most passionate I've ever heard Derek.
I don't think I've ever heard Derek be like this vocal about anything before.
I hate watching people step on sharp things, and it just
It's a
so
filibuster.
you can't watch the end of Home Alone then.
That does make me cringe. Those are horror movies in my mind. Home Alone, those are horror movies. Better Watch Out was just like Home Alone 5 in my mind.
That's funny. I got to see Underwater, which we'll talk about in a minute. And the other thing I just started watching, I wanted to talk about it in a dedicated episode, but because of travel plans and other things, it just didn't happen. So we'll have to talk about it in a later episode. But the new Dracula miniseries has been pretty cool so far. I only made it through one episode, which is why I'm not going to give it my official review. But the first episode is really good. Scott, I think you like it. Have you seen it? Has anybody seen it yet?
We've seen, I think, about the first half hour of episode 1, and we had to turn it off, but we were both really digging it quite a bit.
Yeah, it's fun. It's I'm really liking Sister Agatha and that character.
The nun she's fantastic.
Yeah. And what was that, Brian?
I'm just going to say, I'll be honest, I'm a little wary because a lot of what I heard is like a lot of people have loved the first and second episode, and then like the third episode takes a turn, or as I've heard it, more of a dive. So I'm really scared to invest my emotions and my enjoyment in something that might let me down at the end. But again, that's just going off of other people's opinions at this point.
And here's the thing for me about that. I don't know. Yeah, it really depends on the property, I guess. I mean, you guys know if it's vampires, I'm watching it. Mm-hmm. But in this case, having seen the first episode, like the first episode was so great. Like, I'm okay if the other episodes don't work out. It'll be disappointing, but like I won't regret having watched the first episode. We'll come back to this, and I'll be like, "Oh my God, I regret watching that first time." but no, right now I'm loving it. Class Bang as Dracula is awesome and tries to do his own thing while also paying homage to some of the greats. There's some Bela Lugosi, so there's some clear Christopher Lee Hammer stuff in there. But you know what I love, and I had mentioned this, in other episodes, why I like Gary Oldman's version is that he talks. He's a more fully fleshed out character, and he's got a lot to work with, and he's great. So yeah, I'm loving the first episode. When we come back, we're gonna take a little break because we have, and not on this episode, we're gonna take a little break on being on Corpus Club because it's Women in Horror Month coming up. So Heather is going to take charge. She's going to have some wonderful guests, and so we'll be coming back in March. So in March, at some point, I will let everybody know how the other two episodes worked for me.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a mini series, right? Are the episodes like feature length movie?
Yeah, they're all about an hour and a half. I mean, give or take, depending on the episode.
Oh, okay. And this is Mark Gatiss, right? Is that how you say his name?
Yeah, and Stephen Moffat. I mean, that team worked on Sherlock, but then they also did Doctor Who. I mean, there's just some really good. They're really good with dialogue. There's some really good dialogue there. There's some good choices with how they want to, invert some of the stories or change expectations. Everybody tries to put their spin on it. So I like where they're going so far.
I will say that's also contributing a little bit to my wariness, just because in terms of, people saying it started off really well and then kind of dipped off at the end, that tracks with what Sherlock did. I absolutely loved the first season of Sherlock. By the end of it, it was just like, how have we gotten here? Why are they superheroes? Like, why are they running off screen and diving from explosions? Like, it turned into a very different thing. So I think I've still got a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth from that, which is making me a little bit more wary about the Dracula series.
You know what? Just look at it as just a refreshing, lively take on Dracula. That's, different than the rest. And it is. It's kind of almost goofy in a way. It's like it's very playful, and it's just different from other adaptations, and that's why I'm like really digging it so far. And even if that last episode is a mess, I can hardly wait to see it.
There's something I watched on Netflix recently that wasn't Dracula, but it was on Netflix. Was a movie called Truth or Dare, and it's not Blumhouse's Truth or Dare, and it's not one of the several other movies called Truth or Dare, because I know there's been probably 4 or 5.
So this is a new one?
It's the other one.
This came out in 2017. It actually premiered on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Oh, I know this one.
This, I kind of went into it not really knowing anything about it, and it really like blew me away. Me, my sister and brother-in-law, we watched this kind of just looking for something spooky, not really knowing what to expect, and it is really damn good. It's got Heather Langenkamp in it as a really interesting character, but for the most part, it follows like these college kids who go into a house, start playing a game of Truth or Dare, and turns out there's this entity that's forcing them to play the game, and it's forcing them to do dares that are more and more deadly, and they have to try and survive 3 rounds. So the movie like creates these very well established rules, and the dares just get more and more freaky, but they're able to like kind of outsmart this thing to some extent. Like they some of the characters have like medical background knowledge, so one of them's like going to be a doctor, so they're able to kind of work as a team and try and survive this really intense game of Truth or Dare. So it actually sounds like some similarities to the movie that would come later. And just out of curiosity, we're going to rent that one, the Blumhouse one, and watch it and kind of compare the two. But man, it was really good. Like, it's a really fun and disturbing ride. I would definitely recommend it if you haven't seen it.
I'll have to add it to the list. I like how Brian, I tried to give you guys a chance to say something. I'm like, okay.
No, I honestly, I haven't even heard that. I haven't even heard of that one. I don't think.
Yeah.
The Blumhouse one I've seen.
Yeah, the Blumhouse one.
I think Derek, we've covered the other Truth or Dare, I'm pretty sure.
Well, the Blumhouse one, right?
No, the Netflix one.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
It might have been pre you, but I mean, I know I'm familiar with the movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a good one. It's a gooder.
It's a gooder. Now it may not be strictly horror, but we watched season 2 of You.
Oh, nice.
And it's great. Oh, it's so good.
And there's definitely some horror moments in there, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, no, there's some good kills in the show, but it's just basically about the psychology of this stalker, and the story is told from his point of view.
Oh, interesting.
And he just sees himself as this nice guy, right?
I liked it better the first time when it was called Dexter.
No, it's different than Dexter.
I've heard.
Although they're in the same world, for sure.
But it's also one of those things where it's like, you could say, oh, well, Halloween and Friday the 13th are the same thing. It's a guy in a mask walking around killing people, but it's, very different flavors of that, at least in some cases. But so I'm just being a cranky old man about it.
I'm telling you boomers.
And that's coming back? Is that coming back for a 3rd season now too? I thought I heard that somewhere. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. No,
I know Tamika's a big fan of that too.
Oh, it's a good show. It's good and trashy and funny and very, very interesting.
Nice. I'll have to put it on the to watch list along with Marianne, because I know, Brian, you were recommending that series as well.
Yes. Yeah. I'm still plugging away at that one myself.
Is it still holding up to after a few episodes?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because you kind of wonder, like, sometimes the first episode's so good and then sometimes it doesn't live up to that throughout.
You mean like Dracula? Don't curse me on this, guys. I'm gonna love that third episode.
Oh, it's going to be the best thing you've ever seen. I promise you.
Oh, thank you. See, that's some positivity I need. Okay, we are moving on to Underwater. So, as I mentioned before, this is a full-on spoiler conversation. Sometimes we'll do some episodes where we try to stay away from spoilers, but Underwater's been out for a couple of weeks. Hopefully you've seen it. If you haven't seen it, go see it, and then come back and listen to this. But, so we're going to chat Underwater. Like we usually do, I'll kind of go around the room, ask you guys just for some brief impressions, and then we'll dive into some of the bigger topics, spoiler topics, whatever you guys want. So I already mentioned I loved it. I'll just move it on over to Scott. Scott, what do you think?
Okay, here's my brief impression of James Mason. Oh, and he's going to like you too. That's James Mason from Salem's Lot.
Bravo.
Well, I'm logging off, everybody. It was good talking to you. Have a good night.
I didn't finish yet, but done horribly. No, listen, Underwater is it's a ton of fun. It's like a New World picture with a budget. And I really can't think of any kind of higher praise than that. It's lean, it's mean, and it's pressurized for your pleasure.
Oh, that has to be on the Blu-ray. Please let that be on the Blu-ray cover.
I'm campaigning for it.
Okay, and Brian, you got to follow that up.
Well, seeing as I didn't even know who James Mason was until 5 minutes, I'm not going to try and impersonate him.
Okay, boomer.
Go eat some avocado toast, millennial. So as a fan, anybody who's listened to the aquatic horror show that Derek and I did with Heather knows that I am a big fan of late 80s aquatic horror. And this is very much a spiritual successor of those movies. But again, given a budget, and it didn't waste that budget by just turning it all into by just concentrating on the effects. In a lot of ways, it didn't necessarily bring anything new. It's a bunch of people at the bottom of the ocean who start getting attacked by this unknown entity. But if you know how to do it and you can execute well, you don't have to bring anything new. And I think that's exactly what is that William Eubanks? Is that the director here?
Eubank. Yep.
Eubank. Yes. He just kind of took a lot of those old 80s aquatic horror movies and just turn it into something that I think was a little less kitschy, a little less winky, turn it into something a little bit more serious, but also still a lot of fun. Like, he didn't drain all of the spirit out of it. And so to do that, honestly, the only thing that breaks my heart about this movie is that it was dumped, not just as a January movie, because we all know now that January horror movies don't, they tend to be where we get those nice surprises, like Heather wrote about recently. But this was definitely a dumb situation because it cost $80 million to make. I think they shot it 2 years ago, and they only just got around to kind of plopping it out now, and they really didn't market it. Which is a shame because it's so much fun. I wish more people would see this movie.
Yeah, I agree with that. It is because I want to see more movies like this, and coincidentally, this is also the last movie, it looks like, that will have the 20th Century Fox name to it. Now that that's going to be 20th Century Studios over at Disney, so it's kind of the end of an era in a couple different ways there. But yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I really loved. I was able to see this for $5.37 at the local theater. Seeing a matinee today, actually late afternoon. Felt like I snuck in at that price, so I was loving that. And I also was the only one in the theater, so it was extra scary to watch that movie alone. I was pretty freaked out. I was looking in the shadows and wondering if, I swear I thought I heard noises that maybe wasn't the movie, and I don't know if I was just going crazy or if the creatures had come off the screen. But like you mentioned, Brian, when we did that aquatic horror episode with Heather. That was the first time I had seen Leviathan and Deep Star 6, and I feel like this had the underwater scenes like in the suits from Leviathan combined with the ship scenes from Deep Star 6, but with even more of a budget, like you mentioned. And I feel like it really combined those well. And I think it was as big a budget movie as it was. It still felt very intimate with the characters. So I like that. I think this one, I might get some grief for this, but I actually think you could almost call this Cloverfield underwater. I really like, and I say that as someone who loves Cloverfield. Like, it's not a knock. Cloverfield's one of my favorite movies that I've seen in theaters ever. It was. I still think it holds up really well. But I think everything from the creature design to some of the found footage elements that we have, to the claustrophobia, like this feels like Cloverfield. I actually think this is a better Cloverfield movie. Like, it makes more sense as a Cloverfield movie than 10 Cloverfield Lane or the Cloverfield Paradox, because both of those movies I feel like stood better on their own without the Cloverfield name. This one I actually feel like is the perfect complement to Cloverfield. So that might just be me, but that was like my biggest takeaway.
You got some good stuff there. So I want to talk about that in a minute, though. So we'll get something I want to talk about as a separate topic as we're jumping into more spoilers. But the heavy hitting questions are going to be first. So we're going to start with, do you guys think that you could survive these underwater scenarios, or does the thought of like swimming underwater or being that low, does that scare you guys? Because I know for some people, just the fact that they were underwater for that long, that they're that deep, or these tight scenarios, like that was claustrophobic for people. Like, was it scary and intense for you guys just watching it?
Is this an either or both scenario? Because I'm going to take the both for 500, Alex. No, none of this is appealing, I think, to sensible people. The thought of being 7 miles down, not only 7 miles down, but completely constricted in just about your every movement, even though you do have room to move around and all that. I think just knowing that all that water is on top of you would just be horrifying. And then what they do really well is when they put you in those suits in this movie, and your stomach just tightens up a little bit more.
Yeah,
it's just really well done. I think this movie would have cost $120 million if it had a first act.
But here's what I think is interesting
about compliment, and I'm saying that as a compliment.
Okay.
It doesn't bother with, there's like a 20-minute first reel of character development that's there. And
to get to know them.
Yeah. And then you get, the bathroom scenario when everything starts to unfold. And I mean, I mean it as a compliment. To me, this movie is like Jurassic Park 3. Why it's so much better than Jurassic Park 2 is it just boils it down to dinosaurs, island. You have to survive. In 90 minutes, it's over. And I'm like, yes, thank you very much. It's just great sometimes. Like, B movies don't have to be stretched out to A movie length. Let a B movie be 90 minutes. It tells you exactly everything that you need to know, and it's just a terrific flick.
And I also think that's what Underwater does, that it's kind of kindred in the late 80s, Deep Star 6, Leviathan. They all had, and even going back to Alien, they would have those beats where you got to know the crew by seeing them in like a slice of life scene where they're all in like the break room or like in the chow room, and seeing how they interact and kind of building like what the different character connections are. Here, you only get to see that after it's all hit the fan. So you have to see like, okay, what are these people like under a great deal of stress? So you're not seeing a change. You're just getting right into, okay, what are these like when we're down to brass tacks, like what can you count on? And I think what is also really interesting about Underwater is that nobody like succumbs to their baser impulses in this movie like they do in other iterations of aquatic horror. Like everybody is acting in good faith and doing the best they can to do well by themselves and by everybody else.
Yeah, and there's no impulse like nuclear explosion from Deep Star 6, or nobody's trying to sabotage or scramble ahead to save their own life over others. It's a very like selfless set of characters, which is kind of refreshing because you almost expect that now with these types of films, kind of like you expect the opening 30-minute like get to know them like they're on a mission that goes well, and you kind of see how they interact. It's kind of refreshing how like Eubank and the team play with their expectations a little bit, and they get to like the meat and potatoes a lot quicker. And it's nice. It kind of keeps you on your toes more.
And going back to Jonathan's original question in terms of, so in real life, I would be worthless in this scenario because I am both claustrophobic and also terrified by the size of the ocean. So like both of those things mixed together would mean I'm pretty much useless to everybody around me. But at the same time, I kept thinking, like, especially when that scene where they're all getting in those big suits and kind of like gearing up, this would make for a really good, like, immersive experience ride, like a big theme park, like Universal or something like that. Like, I would 100% line up for this ride, knowing that at the other end of it, I'm not going to get, swallowed by a big sea monster or something like that.
No, I wouldn't do it because you don't know that you're not going to get swallowed, Brian. Use your head, man.
Is this immersive or is this immersive? Come on.
Thank you. Yeah. Like, I'm not taking that chance. If I have a choice not to be put in that scenario, I'm not going to be put in that scenario.
Well, fine. I'll go on twice.
Okay.
Well,
fine.
they have those. What is it that in the Bahamas they have this like diving thing you can do where you put the there's like a full like head helmet you put on. You can just like walk out and swim with sharks. So we could have you do that. See how that goes. Start with sharks and then work your way to monsters.
That'll be the third 47 meters down movie. It sounds like.
Well, I used to live in the Bahamas, so I know a good drinking place, and you go do that. And if you make it back, we'll get together for a drink.
Okay.
Sounds good.
There you go. Yeah, it's funny because my most of my immediate family, when I was younger, we all did like diving certification. So we did it. We're in New York, so in Western New York, so you got to train in a pool and a lake, and then eventually you can, get out into the ocean when you go on a trip or whatever. But it's interesting because we learned a lot from that, and I thought they would really enjoy the movie, and they had a great time seeing it. But they were kind of talking about it from that perspective, and you have a tank and it might have an hour of air under normal breathing situations. But when you start learning how to dive and you go down, and it might even just be 10 feet or 20 feet, like you go through most of that tank in 15 to 20 minutes because you're hyperventilating, because you're, like what's going to happen. And so many things cause you to shoot up as well. Like if you don't have the right buoyancy or if something scares you or whatever, like a lot of people, their first reaction is to just, I'm just going to go to the top. And I think what's so scary about this movie is that being miles down, even just being 50 feet down or 100 feet down, you get the bends or decompression sickness. So like it's not even physically possible to shoot up, necessarily that quickly. And I'm not even referring to the end. I'm just talking about in general. So I think the idea that you're kind of forced there, anyway, is kind of scary, and the amount of pressure. I thought, so even though you're dealing with, well, I could drown, or they're in some of these tight situations, but the pressure, I think, is what's kind of fun that they play with here as well, especially with the cracked mask, where it's like when he's holding it, there's something wrong with it, and it's like that would be a terrible way. There are so many bad ways you could go in this movie. I don't know which way I'd like to. I mean, drowning doesn't sound good. The pieces of the station falling on you, but knowing that your mask is cracking and then just. I don't know. But
if I could, I feel like that way of dying is far worse for the people around you than it is for you. He didn't even feel that. He was dead before he heard the crunch. It's everybody else who has to then walk through what used to be him, who that's, I think, really terrible for.
Yeah, that's kind of what as I'm talking through it, I'm kind of thinking that maybe I'd rather be crushed immediately than drown. So you're onto something there.
No, I would be like the old couple in Titanic that's cuddling on the bed as the room fills up, except it would be like my body pillow.
with a picture of himself on it for some reason.
Yeah, that's right.
Till the end.
But on that topic, they get away with quite a bit for a PG-13 movie.
I agree.
Yeah.
They really do.
It's definitely darker than Annabelle Comes Home.
We're going to stay on that one. Overturn that rating on Annabelle.
And as I say that as someone who loved Annabelle Comes Home, it's just
yeah, it was on your favorites. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, they definitely did push it. I would be, this is one of those movies where I think there probably is a little bit on the cutting room floor just to keep that PG-13. So I would love an unrated cut. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I think they could have pushed it just a little bit more. I know what they were going for, and as is, I still thoroughly enjoyed it.
I think that they didn't have faith in what they had. Otherwise, I think this movie is a summer release movie.
Oh, that would have been fun too. Yeah.
I think it would have done a lot better
if they marketed it that
in the
right.
summertime. Yeah.
Here's my question about that, though, and I don't have an answer. But do you think that we're giving it more of a pass, or we enjoyed it more because it was an unexpected January surprise, and because none of us knew about the big monster at the end? I'm sincerely asking. I'm not sure how I feel about it.
I don't think the trailer is very good, in the sense that it doesn't convey the tension or the amount of fast-paced fun that this is. I don't think the trailer conveys that. I know, for me anyway. When I first saw that trailer, I was kind of like,
Yeah,
they really did undersell it, but I'm surprised that they didn't show the monster. Like,
I'm so glad they didn't.
I'm so like, I'm very happy for them in that regard, like that they decided to keep the surprise. But yes, I do think the trailer wasn't great. I do think they should have marketed it better, but I'm glad that they didn't show the monster.
Yes. Oh, totally. That's not what I was looking for. It's just, I found the trailer a little, lackluster, you know.
I guess where I'm going with it is, if this movie had been more of a summer release, I feel like the marketing team might have done like some push to give it like a hint at the end where you like hear a roar or you see something at the very end of the trailer, like, oh, there's something bigger. Yeah. So anyway.
But in a way, though,
the trailer kind of made that seem like it was going to be more of like a psychological thriller, like kind of leaning into like, they made the whole movie seem like it was going to be what was basically just that like 45-second inner monologue that Kristen Stewart has. And that's really not what this movie is at all. So yeah, there could have been some kind of a happy medium where, maybe not kind of showing everything with the big monster, but like more with the, I guess, medium-sized monsters or something like that.
And you know what? And none of us can know, even if this movie had come out in the summer, it still might not have done very well. Sometimes movies they don't connect at first with audiences in the theater. It's the way it goes, But I mean, you get that January mindset a little bit, which, I'm trying to get out of because we've gotten some really good January movies, but there's still that stigma there, right? And also the fact that it had been sitting on the shelf for 2 years, right? That doesn't necessarily instill confidence either.
I have to imagine, because I can figure out any way to put both Hammer and Alien into an episode, I have to imagine that this has to be a little bit of like post Alien Covenant jitters, because Fox realizes that they don't know what Alien fans are looking for. They thought that Prometheus was going to work. And they're like, no, Ridley, you need a lot more Alien. That's going to do it. With Covenant, it doesn't work. And so I not only do I think they're gun shy because of that, and then also when Disney takes over, it's like, well, what are we going to do with this? The Disney model these days, as we know, is they want their movies to have a chance to make $1 billion. They want to get rid of these smaller movies. I mean, they're talking about remaking Home Alone for Disney Plus because they are not confident it's going to make a lot in theaters. If they don't have a tent pole, they're not going to do it. And so I think this had the unfortunate, the unfortunate bad timing. I think under the right circumstances, this should have been a huge hit.
Yeah,
you're right, because this would have been done with production right around when Covenant ate it at the box office, right?
Yeah, this was done around. It looks like initial filming was done in early 2017.
Wow, that is amazing that it kind of sat around for that long. But yeah, it's. I would be curious. I mean, this past summer was so packed too with horror releases. You almost wonder if it would have gotten lost in the fray. Like we had Crawl and 47 Meters Down Uncaged, so we already had some aquatic horror going on. But there's always room for one more, so you never know. And Crawl, it's interesting because Crawl was made for a fraction of the budget and still had, I think they had multiple like underwater tank sets that they built for that movie. And it was just made for like 13.5 million compared to, 50 to 80 million, it looks like, for underwater. So it kind of makes, I guess you're doing a lot more with the effects, creating these underwater bases and things like that, as opposed to just one house. But it is interesting how it, maybe you wonder like what they could have done to maybe save some money and make a little money. But I'm glad it exists one way or another.
I always wonder about test screenings. Like, so they get what, just a regular mixture of people off the streets to watch the movie and then have them graded. It would make more sense to me when it comes to horror to have an all horror audience watch it. Because then if you get 80% of that horror audience telling you it's not very good, your movie's screwed. But if you have, a high percentage of horror audience who likes your movie, there's your confidence right there. Because if you're going to get all of the horror people, then you also stand a pretty good chance of widening that net. And I think that's the way they should do test screenings.
I mean, I'd love to believe that to be true, but I feel like they would have done that with Dr. Sleep and got the box office that they got with Dr. Sleep. Like, horror fans said nothing but loving it. And in terms of kind of making the leap to a mainstream appeal, it just didn't really do it. So I don't know. I'd like to think that we have that kind of sway. But I just, sometimes I think I forget, and I'm definitely guilty of this. Like, because we all love it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to catch on with a more mainstream audience.
No, but you also will have a horror film where that most of us, don't connect with, that maybe the studio thinks we will.
True.
Right. Yeah, as opposed to like someone, just the general audience saying, "Where's the xenomorph?"
I guess what I'm saying is, if you have 100%, of a wide horror audience that likes your movie, then you should at least have the confidence to do good marketing for it, because you've already got one audience, so you don't have to necessarily cater to them. But I don't know.
No, I think you got something there. I mean, I basically think that the point is that, and we don't know what different studios do for every single movie. At least I don't have that insight. But I do think that they should know when a movie works and doesn't. It seems like sometimes I've heard, like, sometimes studios are surprised. Like I've heard from, trade reports that Warner Brothers was completely taken aback that Batman v Superman wasn't the movie that they thought it was. Well, it's like, well, then you clearly were talking to the wrong people when you did test screenings. Like this wouldn't take, and to your point, Scott, like, just get a handful of comic book fans, put them in a theater, and they'll be like, there's something wrong with this movie. And similarly for Underwater, had they filled it with horror fans, I think they would have gotten, that they would have known, and maybe they did, that this movie was going to, that horror fans would really latch onto this.
And then it's also, there's so much more in the horror marketplace right now, just even theatrically. We're kind of seeing it, major releases or, theatrical releases every month now. I mean, we have, I think, 4 horror theatrical releases in the month of January, and then we've got at least 3 more in February, and then we have A Quiet Place 2 in March.
Yeah, so you basically have to make your money week 1 and hope that word of mouth keeps you around for week 2, at least in theaters.
Yeah, and it's a great problem to have for, horror fans. It's, we used to have to wait until I always felt like August and January were kind of the months when horror movies would come out, but now it's every month. It seems like we have something to look forward to, and that's not even including, new streaming service releases and Shudder and TV shows. So there's also just so much content to keep up with. It's like you really have to hook people. And I think, like you said, Scott, the trailer didn't necessarily convey the claustrophobic atmosphere of the movie, or the psychological aspects of it, where you just really felt like you're with those characters. It almost felt like playing a video game, and I mean that as a compliment, because it just really felt like you were on this mission with them, and you have kind of that found footage element to it. And then that's not even including all of the creature stuff, which they kind of kept hidden as well. So maybe people just didn't realize the movie that they could have seen. And then you've got also like Kristen Stewart spearheading it. It's kind of surprising with her on like spearheading this cast that it didn't get more people just for that. But maybe it'll find second life on home video or something.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the cast. We'll wrap up by talking about the monster after. So let's talk about the cast for a little bit. I'm sure you guys will be talking about Kristen Stewart. So I will bring up the fact that I was surprised that John Gallagher Jr. was in it. I hadn't looked at the cast right away. I think he's a little underused in this role, especially because he's kind of knocked out for a little bit and they're dragging him. But like, he's really good. Like the guy is a chameleon. Like I'm like always going to be like, is that who I think it is? Because he's in 10 Cloverfield Lane. And I think that's where a lot of people might recognize him from, and also the Belko Experiment. But he's also the only baddie in Hush. So he's the killer, and so a lot of people don't realize it's the same guy. And but anyway, anytime I see him pop up, I'm always excited because I think he's a great actor. And I'm happy to see him in this, but I wish we could have spent a little more time with him.
Was I the only one a little bit surprised? I think this might be the first movie I've ever seen where Vincent Cassel didn't play kind of a scumbag. And it was refreshing, and he was really good in it. And like, it actually like took me a while to realize like, okay, we're not going to have a left turn where he turns out to be some kind of like sinister bad guy.
No, he's an android.
No, he's just genuinely like a good guy, and he plays it really well.
So the interesting thing, though, is like I think there's a little bit more to that story, and I really didn't I haven't looked online for a lot of the online chatter. I really need to.
I think I know where you're going with this. Is this
in the locker? Yeah,
is this in terms of like hinting that he might know more about these monsters than he was letting on?
Yeah, that was my implication from in the locker, that he was like looking for something specifically. Like he was specifically digging. Now there's like clips in the beginning that say like that lead me to believe that there have been other sightings of these smaller monsters, that the company that's digging is responsible for it, and that he must be aware of it to some degree, or at least he's helping. Even if he's not aware there are monsters, he's aware that they're looking to dig in a specific place. But I would have to imagine, as the captain, that he may be aware of more than he's leading on. So he actually may not be as good as we think he is. But who am I to say? And maybe there's something on the cutting room floor. Maybe there's a little bit more there. But I had a feeling based on that locker that the guy knows that there are monsters there.
See, and that was funny. That was something where and you're talking about the sequence where she goes to the old. She winds up at the old Shepherd one, and she goes through his stuff and realizes he was in that site as well. My main takeaway from that was her realizing that like his daughter had died, and that kind of added a layer of kind of like tragedy to his story. I didn't think of him maybe knowing more about it until I actually. For whatever reason, one of the things I like to do is go back after a movie, especially one that I really like, and check out the Wikipedia synopsis, just to see, like, sometimes they'll put something in there that I didn't pick up. And that was kind of the case where the synopsis mentions that, like, it hints that he knew more about that operation than he really let on.
Gotcha.
So it's something that, like, I didn't notice it at the time, but looking back, I could see an argument being made for that. I still don't know if I would necessarily see him as like a sinister or like a villainous character. It's kind of one of those things where he might have just been, you don't know how much he knew. You don't know, even if he did know, maybe he wanted to be down there because he knew the dangers people were going to go through and wanted to be there to try and, do the best he could to protect people. I didn't get a sense that, he was, even if he knew more than he was letting on, it didn't necessarily mean he was a bad guy.
I agree that the character as we see it, we see him do a lot of things that are more heroic or more, and also surprised. So it may be one of those things where this is just an evil corporation and he just happens to be working for it.
I think he was just another cog in it, because when they get to the end of the movie and they say that, of course, the company, the two survivors were not allowed to speak to the media, and the corporation kind of snuffs off any kind of speculation about, what happened. I don't think he knew. I don't think.
But wouldn't the captain of the ship, and if there are reports of like creatures coming out, like where are they coming from? Clearly, they're coming from the base.
Come on, man! Don't put that negative energy.
You're telling me
on
the
him,
captain.
man.
You're telling me the captain of this base doesn't know that there's rumors or that there's like sightings of these little creatures? If anyone would know, it's him.
No,
I don't know, because like there's kind of a precedent for the other way around in some of the if we're again looking back at some of the earlier aquatic horror movies, like in Leviathan, like Peter Weller's character is just as much in the dark as everybody else, and the company they're working for is doing everything they can to kind of keep them in the dark about it.
No, same with Alien. If we look at Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like he's still a good guy, although I do feel like he knew maybe a little bit more than he was letting on. And then the fact that he kind of brushed off Shepard's station when they brought it up initially, like he just didn't even really seem to consider it as an option, even though there seemed to be some relative safety there. But yeah, it's I don't think it almost feels like he's working for Monarch from like Godzilla, King of the Monsters, and maybe that corporation is searching for creatures like the one that is unearthed, and maybe he's just kind of following orders and maybe knows something's up but doesn't quite know what it is. And I mean, he kind of he almost seems like a father character to Kristen Stewart, and he's definitely like his concern for her well-being and the rest of the crew kind of goes above and beyond what a company man strictly would do. So I do feel good about the captain overall, but definitely it's funny how the camera just kind of lingers on his locker a little bit longer than it usually would. And
you know what? Who brought up this Vincent Cassell is a monster bullshit?
I think it was Bryan, right? I think it was Bryan, because I forgot about it.
No, Bryan was coming to his defense.
No, but he started by saying he usually is, and that's what triggered in my brain
said it's nice to see Vincent Cassell play a good guy, and then Jonathan goes into a 10-point diatribe about what a monster he is.
Yeah,
I mean, I have a PowerPoint presentation. It's not just a diatribe; it's a presentation.
This is why I can't have nice things, Jonathan.
He knew something. I'm going to uncover it.
The worst part is like now that like another thing. Like the whole idea of him staying behind in the first place does kind of like yes, it goes to that idea of like, well, he's willing to stay behind because he doesn't have much to live for anyway, because he's still kind of grieving over his daughter. But you could also make the argument that there's an element of guilt there. That's why, because they do make a very pointed scene to be like, why didn't you go? Like anyone in here would have told you to go with everybody else. He's like, no, I'm staying with the ship. So, maybe there's also an element of guilt. I still don't think he even if he did know something, I don't think he knew the full extent of what was going on, but he knew he was, he knew he was a cog in some sense, and that the company might not have had everybody's best interest in mind. I don't think
Yeah, I don't think all of that stuff is there. I don't think there's an extra hour of footage sitting on the floor. I don't think we have some epic here in the making that was, Heaven's Gated down from 4 hours to 2.25 or something. I just think it's a simple story. And like I said, there is that whole missing first reel, but that's by choice. They decided to start the story there. So I don't know if that story structure has room to cram in, this from over there and this person's intentions here and what were they doing there kind of thing. I just don't think it has room for it to work.
But if there's a deleted scene, we'll do a separate episode on it.
And part of why the movie works so well is that it leaves a lot of those slates blank and lets you fill it in however you want. Like, Scott, it's fine if it's just a simple story and it's a completely face value. Jonathan, it's also fine if you're seeing things from, the little nods that they have to the locker and things like that. Like, either one of those interpretations can work. And I think that's the mark of a really good movie.
And that's why you can also, I think my interpretation of it being a secret Cloverfield movie could also work.
And Derek, you're bringing it back full circle.
Hey, John Gallagher Jr., he survived.
Segue.
So maybe this is what happens to him before he ends up in the bunker.
Since when was Derek the one to keep us on track? This is really throwing me off.
This is actually, this is
2020, baby.
Yeah. So let's talk about the big creature. I still want to talk about Kristen Stewart, but since you brought it up first, we're going to start with this creature because also talking about interpretation. I guess it's not up for interpretation because, spoiler alert again, and as I had seen on Bloody Disgusting, and they had seen it on YouTube's Mr. H, the directors said
is he the big C?
He's a big Cthulhu. So that definitively in his mind anyway, that's what the final creature is. And, it's one of those things that I knew was, Cthulhu-like, and I'm cool with it just being, unidentified, Kaiju X or whatever. But at the same time, it looked like it had some very definitive, structure in the hands. And I'm like, this doesn't look like a generally doesn't look like an aquatic creature, right? It had more of like a human form to it. So what did you guys think when you saw it? Were you like, that's Cthulhu?
I actually didn't see Cthulhu with a capital C. It was that's a big Lovecraftian, sea monster, but I didn't necessarily think they were trying to actually make it be Cthulhu.
Well, no, unless someone says, hey, that's Cthulhu. It's Lovecraft, right?
Right.
How are we to know?
I'm so used to it not explicitly being Cthulhu, but more like Lovecraftian that I just assumed, that's probably an inspiration. I didn't think of it right away. I thought more of this is a godlike creature, but more along the lines of the Titans that were being resurrected in Godzilla, King of the Monsters, where they've just kind of been laying dormant. But to hear it actually be specifically Cthulhu is kind of interesting because usually we don't see that as oh yeah, this definitely is that. It's more no, that was an inspiration, and so many things are inspired by Lovecraft's work. So that's pretty cool. But my main thought though was this is what happened in between the before the Cloverfield monster took over New York. This is what happened underwater in a way.
Well, it's like a kid's drawing, right? And at the end, she draws a big, squiggly monster. And someone goes, well, what's that? And she goes, that's Cthulhu. Okay, well, there it is. Yeah, it just seems so arbitrary to name it. Just say it's an underwater, it's an aquatic creature, and, let's get lunch.
It's a pie.
Well, I guess the difference is I like to, kind of dive into some of this stuff, or at least the director's intentions. Is it making it Cthulhu, giving it actual wings, makes it a little different from the fact that it's not like they're uncovering, or at least we don't think anyways, that when they were digging that they actually hit like a pocket where there's other types of kaiju. I mean, did they open a portal? What did they do with it? We won't get these answers. If the movie was super successful, maybe we would. But it seemed like the director certainly had a plan here.
Yeah, but I am glad they didn't name it in the movie because honestly, to name it would somehow make it a little less scary. I'll be honest, when I saw that thing, I don't know why, because it's in hindsight, I feel like I should have seen it coming, but I thought the monsters we were seeing, I thought they were it. So then when you see, my jaw was dropped. And so I wasn't really trying, like at that point, I wasn't really going through the mental steps of being like, oh, is that Cthulhu? It was like, oh my God, that is a huge monster. And kind of that indescribable nature of it is what makes monsters like Cthulhu so scary. So like while it would be an interesting bit of kind of like Lovecraftian fan service to be able to put the name to it, I like that in the context of the movie, they don't try and name it or anything like that. It's just kind of like the Lovecraftian monsters are. They're just big and unknowable, and like seeing them in their full form is almost enough to kind of like drive you insane.
Yeah, that is true. It's almost unfathomable to see a Cthulhu in its full form like that. But it's still, yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting how it shows like it having the small monsters. I thought that also was going to be it. I didn't really see like a colossal creature coming into play, and I'm actually kind of amazed that it was never spoiled by any marketing stuff. And I think that's really cool how they kept that a secret. But it was pretty awesome. I almost expected like a Godzilla reference or something like that when the survivors saw it for the first time. But I think it definitely captured the awe, like jaw-dropping effect of being speechless and just totally overpowered by something that's just so massive that it's horrifying in its own right. And then you also have the smaller, like small scale attacks of the things that like live on it, which again, that also reminded me of Cloverfield with like the little spider creatures, because it makes it so you can have horror like inside the station, but then you can also have this massive threat outside the station, which is pretty cool.
And it's also kind of reminding you of kind of the vastness of the ocean, because again, going back to the idea of like, if it's Cthulhu, you usually put Cthulhu in like the cosmos or in outer space. But here it's just a reminder that like something that big could potentially be on this planet, just in a part of it that's underwater and you've never seen before.
Yeah, I actually think, like, going back to what a little bit to what Scott said, that I'm okay with it not being definitively Cthulhu. That I actually have more questions that way, and that I actually prefer it just being a random creature that they just dug deep enough and they unlocked, just a pocket of the sea where these creatures live, and they came out. Actually, it makes it easier too to have other ones follow, because. Yeah, you're wondering why they're digging so, deep in our own Earth that they hit a cosmic portal that then unleashes Cthulhu. So
it's kind of like the Meg as well, where they were down in the Mariana Trench and unleash something. You always think like, is there some prehistoric layer that we could tap into? And there's all these creatures living under there. And then the whole line about how we know more about space than we do our own ocean, which is pretty creepy when you think about it, since we're living down here. But the vastness of the ocean, I think, you're essentially in space when you're that deep down. So I think it effectively it's claustrophobic, but also the endless possibilities are just as terrifying, because you can't monitor that much water or that kind of depth at all times and really know what's going on.
Yeah, I think I did actually I did a underwater trivia or like a seafaring trivia at Salem last year. And if I remember correctly, like as of 2 or 3 years ago, it was still estimated that like 80% of the ocean is still uncharted.
Okay, I'm going to curl up in a ball right now and cry myself to sleep.
Oh yeah, there's so yeah. We haven't even. I mean, we barely touched the surface there.
So yeah, that is terrifying.
Sweet dreams, Derek.
So the Meg could be based on it. Well, I mean, go back far enough in time, it is based on a true story, just minus some of the events of that movie. But
okay, so let's
how
wrap
about
this
that
up.
Kristen Stewart, huh?
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's wrap this up. Let's talk about our film star, Kristen Stewart. Scott, take us away.
Song and dance number, is that what you're looking for?
No, like literally, get us away, please.
She is she's good in it. I enjoyed her performance, actually. Again, there isn't anything really here for any of the actors to dig too deep into, and the movie moves at such a fast pace that there isn't really a lot of time for, character development. But I think that's what I like about the whole cast, actually, not just Stewart, is it's essentially made up of, instead of a bunch of pretty faces, it's essentially made up of character actors, right? Cassell, TJ Miller, the whole cast really are good actors who can make a quick impression and take you through the movie, and so I would say it's a really good ensemble. One of the better ones that I've seen, I think, in a horror movie of this kind.
Yeah, and I think Kristen Stewart is so chameleon-like in a lot of her roles, especially, post-Twilight. Actually, she had done great work before that with like Panic Room and things like that. But having the short hair and like the glasses, and it feels like she really gets into that role, and it doesn't feel like you're watching Kristen Stewart like this movie is supposed to be, like a marquee movie for her, where it's like, this is a Kristen Stewart vehicle. It just feels like she's playing a very lived in character, and she's just good. She's good enough as an actress where she's able to bring all these different kinds of characters to life. And I think she's made some really interesting choices. And I think this is another really great role for her. And it shows like, it's just a very interesting character that feels real. So I think she does a really good job of not like being Kristen Stewart, but being Nora, and having this whole, it almost feels like there's this whole backstory, kind of that missing first reel that we don't see. Like it almost, you don't really need it because the character feels real enough on its own.
There were actually some shades of like beyond the obvious connection of like an Alien 3 Ripley kind of a thing. It also reminded me a little bit of Sandra Bullock's character from Gravity. And they kind of do that with a couple of characters where you don't get much time to spend with those kind of tragic backstories, but just enough to add like a little extra layer, similar to how Sandra Bullock, I think, like she lost her daughter before the movie started, before Gravity. So you have people here who have lost loved ones and are kind of dealing with grief before any of the events of this movie even start. So just kind of interesting, adding those layers while also, as Scott mentions, like they're not really taking a whole lot of time to delve into that and worry too much about how it's going to kind of affect their character arc. But it's adding nice little flourishes like that makes it more than just a completely like run of the mill underwater aquatic horror movie.
Yeah, I think what I really like about Kristen Stewart's character here is that it feels her character skill set feels very organic, and we don't see her being able to do everything, but her skill set allows her to do a lot and to be a very driving piece of this group. And so I do think that they play the character types well. Same with Jessica Henwick's character, who we see her, normally maybe if they hadn't given these characters as much thought, her character would freak out about going underwater, and she might have been the one whose mask exploded. But the fact that we see her character, kind of gain that strength and push through at the end, I thought was really good. And yeah, like I said, this movie was just such a delight in so many ways. I really just went to it because I was like, well, there's nothing else out. And I started to see some Twitter chatter that it was fun. And I'm like, oh, well, we like underwater movies anyway, so something to take the family. And I just think everything from our giant Cthulhu, to the incredible work that the cast was doing and how terribly intense the movie is, pretty much from start to finish. Like I said, all of this was just a real pleasant surprise.
I think the only thing that I really loved the way they ended it and kind of tweaked the formula for kind of where you think in terms of who's going to survive, who's not. I like what they do there. I know we're getting into spoilers, but I think that's one that, if I can, I'll try and get around it without giving too much away. I appreciate what they did, but did anybody else notice how convenient it was? Essentially, they have to blow up the creature They have to blow up all the creatures around it, but not blow up the escape pods. And it just so happens that like the blast radius from blowing up the drill rig will be enough to kill all of the creatures, but just not quite get to the escape pods.
Yeah, that was a bit of an eyebrow raiser for me too, where I was like, well, that's, and the fact that it shows you a graphic too.
Yes. Yeah. That perfectly shows like, oh, they'll be fine, but all of the creatures will die.
You know, you guys and your lack of faith in science is just disgusting. I studied sonar impulses via water, and that's pretty accurate.
Yes, that sounds like an authoritative source. If
it
I
was
ever
my thesis. It's my thesis.
Oh my God. Okay, we can't beat that. Sonar impulses. What is it? Sonar impulses.
In relation to water.
In relation to water. Thank you. We can't beat that. I'm done.
Put that on the poster too.
Okay. With that, another episode of Corpse Club comes to an end. We want to thank Bryan, our amazing, talented engineer, for helping us out each and every episode. And as always, we want to thank our listeners, including those of you who have signed up for a Corpse Club membership. Make sure to check out corpseclub.com for our latest episode. You can also check out our backlog, and you can learn how to be a Corpse Club member, which will give you options so you can get a Corpse Club t-shirt, a pin, and pick our next episode topic. You want to hear us talk about about Cthulhu for an hour? We can do it. Vincent Cassell's character being evil for an hour? We can do it. And I'll drag Scott along for both. Don't forget
Leave the man
to rate
alone.
and review us on iTunes. Every rating and review helps. You can also find us on Google Play, SoundCloud, and all of your favorite podcast providers. If you want to get in touch, you can reach out anytime at contact@corpseclub.com. We're on Twitter at Daily Dead News. We're at Corpse Club, and on Instagram and Facebook under Corpse Club. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay scary.